everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in one of our next practices live webinars again today. Today we have the pleasure of having our friend Carlos Motta Nunes. He is the Deputy Superintendent of Water Policy Implementation in Brazil's National Water Agency, ANA. And Carlos is a graduate of the PURC World Bank International Training Program on Utility Regulation and Strategy, as well as a faculty member in our program that he served before several times. So we have the opportunity to learn today with Carlos as he is going to share some of the efforts that are taking place in Brazil in the water sector to ease the effects of the pandemic. So Carlos, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We are looking forward to having this conversation with you today. And just to get us started, I'd love it if you could please give us a little bit of an idea, a background description of what the role, the work that ANA plays in Brazil, so that gives us some context to get us started.
Okay, so good morning. I mean, for me, it's good morning. It's 11 o'clock here in Brasilia, Brazil. Thanks for having me, for giving me this opportunity to speak for all of you. As Araceli said, I'm a alumni I'm a Gator, so as most of you. So my Gator T-shirt is being washed right now, so I couldn't wear it right now, but it was the idea. Well, I've been working for ANA for the last 16 years, and my agency is responsible for water resource management at federal level, which means that we manage the rivers, the lakes that are at federal jurisdiction, and we also have to implement the national water policy for the whole country. That's one role that ANA does. Also, we are responsible. We are now in a discussion in the Brazilian Parliament for ANA to take a new role, which is to have a kind of oversight regulation over the water sector in Brazil. So we are already getting prepared to take on this new role, and this will give us the opportunity to have more contact with the water sector. We do have right now, because we have to reconcile interests in terms of water resource uses. So, for example, we monitor rivers around the country. We monitor water quality. We mediate conflicts on between water users, and so we try to keep the whole water supply chain feasible, especially during this time of crisis, so everybody can have access to water during this time. I think it's a little bit about that.
Excellent. So my understanding, Carlos, is that you get to work with different regulators across the country and municipalities and so on and so forth. So could you please tell us a little bit about what those municipalities and what regulators may be doing in these times of crisis?
Okay. So in this case, I'm going to focus on the water sector itself. Okay. So Brazil in the water sector, the jurisdiction is local. So it's mostly municipalities, and if it's the metropolitan region, it's the metropolitan board, something like this. Okay. So and because of that, in a huge country as Brazil, in a big country that how you make everyone talk the same language. I mean, we speak Portuguese, but not what I'm saying. I'm saying that everyone takes a different approach on this crisis. For example, there are municipalities that are giving exemption for people to pay their bills, their water bills. So those that are poor are not paying, are allowed not to pay their bills during this pandemic. There are other cities that are not allowing the bills to be to increase due to inflation, for example. So they are freezing the value of the tariffs. There are other places that they are not allowed to cut the provision of the service to those that are not paying. So this is causing a huge cash flow problem in the water operators. So how they're going to deal with that? And as I said, every city is taking a different measure. Some of the cities are not doing anything at all, but many cities are really trying to ease the crisis to the population, but on the other, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, you have a service that is going to be compromised for the near future.
Oh yeah, that sounds like you're right. Everybody seems to be taking a slightly different approach to things, which I'm sure does not make things any easier. Instead, probably makes them even more complicated, I would assume. I bet you're going to get some questions on our chat today about those aspects. I wanted to ask you as well, Carlos, and you may have touched on it a little bit, but I think we all agree that these are really unprecedented times. And what do you see as the challenges? What challenges is the pandemic presenting for Brazil with respect to water, and how do you see the country responding to that?
Well, we are trying. The country as a whole is trying to continue the essential services as the water supply is. So the challenge is to have people going to work. I mean, it's an essential service, but we are all locked in. But those who work for water companies do have to go to work. But we have reduced personnel, because if you have, for example, an older people in your house, or if you have someone at risk group, how can we deal with that? So there is a reduction on the people that are available to work at the water companies. It's not being an issue so far. I mean, I haven't listened anything about them. I'm just guessing because it's happening everywhere. But their main challenge is for them to keep the service with low revenues. So I'm hearing from different operators that the revenues have been reduced from 20 to 40% in some places, but the costs are still the same, you know. And so they will need something to make it easy for them to survive this time of uncertainty. I don't know how long it's gonna last, but what the government is trying to do is trying to ease this time. For example, at federal level, they have negotiated with the banks, public banks that are those who really finance the sector, and they are providing standstill loan agreements. So they're not going to pay their loans for maybe this whole year and start to pay only next year. So that's going to ease their balance sheet for a while. So that's the kind of thing that they are trying to face, which is how to make the service to survive financially during this time. And we may also have problems in the supply chain for some products, maybe chemical products or things like that. So far, the way Brazil has managed this, it doesn't seem a problem, but we have to be aware of that.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, that's going to be a tough thing for sure for all the water agencies, distributors. And something else that tends to be a problem in general is communication, but especially in these super stressful times. Communications and coordination across different organizations is particularly difficult, but also particularly important. So how are you and your counterparts doing in this regard? How are you handling all this?
Well, I think there is two dimensions here in case of specifically the water resource management. We already had a good communication systems with the whole country. We have the partner agencies at state level that we have virtual meetings with them weekly. So even before the crisis, we still had weekly meetings with them to discuss rules of operation of reservoirs and rivers. So when there's a flood or there is a drought, so how we are going to operate together, because the water is just one. It doesn't matter if it's in the state or if it's a federal jurisdiction. The water is going to flow to some place, so we have to work together. Right. But that's one point. So to the transition for because of the crisis was quite easy in terms of water resource management, because of this system that we had already in place, you know. But in the water supply and sanitation sector, water utilities, because the jurisdiction is local, we didn't, and maybe still really don't have this kind of work together or a line of command because of this scattered jurisdiction, I would say, something like that. So what they are trying to do is to work with their organizations that represent the sector. So they try to speak for them. For example, you have representation for municipalities, municipal water services, or representations for private water companies, and so on and so forth. So that's the way they're trying to make communication easy. So those are the ones that try to reach out to the government in order to negotiate ways to ease the crisis, you know. But it's not a clear line of command because of this jurisdiction to be regional.
I hear you. Okay, thank you for answering that question as well. I also kind of maybe beginning to look a little bit into the future, possibly. What are the biggest concerns? What do you see? How do you see that Brazil will emerge after this in terms of water? Will it be unchanged, or what kind of changes do you expect may happen?
Well, I think that's a lesson for the whole world. I believe that we have to plan for the uncertainty of the future. I mean, of course, nobody was thinking or planning for a pandemic as we're doing right now. The last one was 100 years ago. It was the Spanish flu 100 years ago. So nobody was prepared for that. But I mean, there are other crises that the water sector is going to face. For example, we had the most severe drought in Brazil that finished 2 years ago. But the drought lasted 6 years. And the water sector suffered a lot because of that, you know. And then that raised a concern that we have to better plan for droughts. You have to be prepared. We need to have more water security in the country because those droughts, because of climate change, are going to happen again in the future. I believe that's the same in terms of the COVID-19. We have to be prepared to face different. We need to have better contingency plans. But one thing that's going to happen after the end of this crisis is how those water companies will recover from the financial losses.
Yeah.
Because they need to recover in order to put the system working properly, you know. Because otherwise they won't have money to continue investing, continue replacing the pipes, or continuing all the investment that are necessary. Brazil has about 50% of the population do not have access to sewage treated, just for you to have an idea. So there's a lot of investment to be done, but right now the companies are losing their capacity of investment because of this cash flow. So there's cash flow problem. So the next year we have to think how renegotiate the contracts to keep them balanced so they can still go to the financial sector, to get money to invest all the investment necessary to put Brazil in a better position in terms of water supply and sanitation. So when you say that Brazil has 50% without access to sewage treated, we are talking about 100 million people.
Oh, wow.
That's the number I'm saying, you know? So there's a lot of investment to be done. So one thing that's probably going to happen, we have to defer those investments, because the problem is to solve the problem going on right now, but you still have a lot to do in the sector.
Oh, yeah. Okay? So much work ahead, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Carlos, if you're okay with this, I don't know if you're able to read the chat, but we do have some, I think, very interesting questions that I'd like to start addressing.
Yes, please, I couldn't read.
Yes, I'll read them for you to make it a little easier. So yeah, so one comes from our very own Mark Jamieson here. And he's asking, is there anything in the current governance system in which your authority does not extend to water utilities that hinders Brazil's ability to respond to the pandemic?
Yes,
So is
that's
there
true.
any?
Yes, as I said, we don't have jurisdiction on the water sector. And if we had this new water act that's being discussed in our parliament, we would have the power or the jurisdiction to make things to work organized, you know. So we would be able to tell them, do this way, don't do that way, in order to standardize the way the country faces the crisis. But today we don't have this jurisdiction. So that's why I'm saying that at every municipality, a different decision is made.
All right, and that's totally different. That's definitely an interesting approach. I wonder how many of the people in our audience are in a similar situation. I have another
just for
question.
you to have an idea, just a point.
Sure.
That I think Friday I saw a number of 200 different municipalities taking different measures on dealing with COVID-19 in the water sector. 200.
Wow.
And counting. So I don't know the number today.
Another question also from Mark Jamieson that says as follows: if the emergency price controls remain in place, how long do you think it might be before some water utilities begin to run out of money?
Well,
very simple question, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I don't know their balance sheets sufficiently to know that. But I can't say. I don't really know. What I know is the government's trying to make it not that hard for them to survive this crisis. But true, Professor James just said, they're getting loans also for cash flow, so they're short-term loans. And they also don't need to pay for the long-term loans for a while. So that's how we are dealing with that. So as I said, next year we have to calculate new tariffs or get some subsidy from governments. I don't know what the solution will be in order to make this thing go fine again.
Yes, yes. We have a question as well from our friend Alejo Molinari that is asking us, from the perspective of the human rights to water and sanitation, and since washing hands is basic to combat COVID-19, what are you doing to facilitate water access for those in kind of rural, peripheral areas where traditional water services are not so good or don't arrive?
Well, it's not about, in this case, not about COVID-19 answer itself. Brazil has some projects that address this water supply of rural areas, especially those in the northeast. That's the poorest part and the driest part of the country. So they have also special arrangements that it's the population who runs the water service right there. Some of them work very well. So, for example, in the state of Ceará, some of them are so-so, I would say. But that's how we're dealing with that. I mean, it's not a matter of crisis. I mean, especially because even the COVID crisis right now is more concentrated on large cities, not at the rural areas. Okay,
all right. We have a very active chat here, and Mark Jameson also indicates or has a comment or question for you. He's saying that you indicated that utility companies might receive loans and delayed loan repayments to deal with their cash flow problems. Do you think water prices will have to increase in the future to address the new debt levels of the water utilities? And thank you for addressing his previous question.
Well, it's something. Yeah, yes. So, as I said, you have to renegotiate the contracts or think about someone's going to have to pay this bill, this total bill. So to be on the tariff, I mean, or it would be fiscal resources. I don't know. I don't know if the country will have the fiscal resources to help the companies in the future. That's something that I still don't know. But this bill needs to be paid sometime. It's not because of the company not to make them survive, but to make the service to go on, you know, to make the investment to continue. So, but I still don't know if how to be solved in the future. We are thinking first on how to calculate the amount of money that's left behind, so how they can be balanced again. That's the first point, and then to see where this money comes from. I still don't know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let me ask you another question that we have here in the chat. Do you have a sense, Carlos, as to how Brazil's water is faring, is doing compared to your neighborhood countries? And maybe we have, I know that we have Alejo here who is very close to you. He's in Argentina, so maybe he has some comments on that as well. He'd like to provide some feedback, possibly. So how is Brazil, do you know,
Well,
coping?
I don't know.
I mean, compared to, okay.
No, I don't really know. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. We have another question as well from Imran in Pakistan, and he's asking, in present scenario, the use of water has increased. How will impact on the how will it impact on the consumers who are already financially under pressure?
Yeah, that's well. I don't have the figures right now, but on one hand, you have more people at home, so they are consuming more water. But on the other hand, you have other sectors that have stopped in the country. Not totally stopped, but for example, airports. Here in Brazil, airports plays a big deal in water consumption. We have a big airport that's a hub for the whole country. And we had 300 flights a day. Now we have 20 flights a day. So there are other consumers that are reducing their consumption right now too. So I don't have these numbers on if the consumption has increased or not. I would say that the population at home consumption has increased, but some industrial consumption or commercial consumption has decreased because everybody's locked in, services are closed. So, but I don't know if they balance each other.
Right. Okay. I have another question from Alvan Haynes here that is asking, what role can regulators play as water utilities try to offer relief to customers?
Well, what I've seen water regulators doing is, I mean, who is providing the relief is not are not the companies themselves, are the municipalities, are the governments. The water utilities are following orders, let's say, something like this, as a general rule, okay? So sometimes the regulator who says that the tariffs are frozen or that you cannot cut the service, or sometimes is the municipality who is saying that, kind of executive order from the municipality or something like this, you know. So their water utilities are following orders, let's say. But on the other hand, that's causing a lot of stress on them. So, for example, I've seen some regulators that are saying, please keep very good records of everything different you are doing right now, because when we are going to renegotiate the service next year, we have everything there, so it'd be much easier for us to know what happened to your service, if the size of the problem that you had to face. So please keep very good records. That would be good for both of us. So that's the kind of thing that regulators are doing.
Okay. That kind of links to the next question that I have for you. That is from Patrick, and he's asking the following: shouldn't the utility companies be expected to have the funds to weather this pandemic? Is a 1 or 2 month delay assuming the lockdown is lifted in a couple of months. So a 1 or 2 months delay in collecting the fees, enough justification to delay capex for wastewater, since there is an effect in the environment.
Well, I couldn't. I think I have to read the question here. Go
Yeah.
down 1 second. Okay, just 1 minute, please.
Yeah, sure. It's from Patrick.
Well, yes, they have the cash flow. I mean, they should have a good. Some of them should have a good cash flow. But in Brazil, we have different utilities, you know. So we have companies, and we also have government branch that they themselves they provide the service. So, for example, they are under public accountability, which is different. It's different in Brazil from the private. And they survive from fiscal resources, from taxes. So taxes have been reduced a lot in the country because all the economy is slowing down. So it's difficult for them to survive in this case. I agree that if you think about 2 months, the utility should have enough money to overcome this difficult, but we don't believe that this crisis is going to finish in 2 months. That's why a good thing is to keep good records of what's going on. And I also agree they have to keep the investment, and they're looking forward to keep their investment. What I'm saying is my conclusion that this investment might be postponed because of some cash flows. The cost of debt is going to increase a lot. That's my point.
Okay. Thank you, Carlos. We have another question as well from Lee, and he makes reference to something you pointed out earlier. He says, you mentioned earlier that operators' revenues from the water bills are down by, I think you said 20 to 40%. They're down by that. And he's asking, what are the strategies in place to encourage consumers to pay their water bills?
Well, the strategy is the opposite. It's not to pay the water bills. So, because, I mean, I'm talking about the poor, okay? So those that are being allowed not to pay the water bill because they need that money to get food, for example. They don't have enough money for everything. So choices have to be made. So what the government is doing is trying to relieve the population, especially the poor, so they can go to the supermarket to buy some groceries, and that's what they're doing. So the strategy is allowing them to have enough money for surviving during this time of crisis. The problem is that the poor represent a large amount of the consumers from the water companies. So they represent a large slice of the revenue cake, you know. So that's why they are having this problem. So that's why the government's trying to provide other solutions for the companies, such as short-term loans for this problem of cash flows and standstill agreement for this long-term investment.
Okay, all right.
Did I answer the question?
Thank you. I guess we'll hear about that, but I think it may be time. Oh, I have another question here. And then I think I'll check with Samantha if we have any people that may want to ask you any live questions. But I have another question. It's long as well, Carlos. Maybe you can see it on the chat. It's from Sanjay, and it says, do you know if any financial relief or help or assistance offered by multilateral development banks or any donor agencies such as the development banks, the Inter-American, I think is probably referring to World Bank, etc., to water and wastewater utilities? If yes, then how can we access it? And just sharing that, I would appreciate any information that could be shared in this regard. So are you aware of any financial help?
I don't know. I'm not aware of that. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. That's always difficult to find, it feels like. So, Sam, do we have then anyone that would like to ask any live questions through, just live questions?
Yes, so during this time of sharing, we're going to ask that you, anyone that's interested in sharing or asking additional questions, that you please raise your hand. And then in doing so, I'll unmute your audio and video if you'd like. And so for that, to raise your hand, if you're on a laptop, the desktop, you'll go to the participant box of the toolbar along the bottom of the Zoom screen. In the participant field, you'll have the option to raise your hand. For those of you that are on a phone or a tablet, you'll find that toolbar along the top of the screen. So I do believe that we have someone now that would like to share. I'm going to go ahead and unmute their audio, and it's Alejo. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and we look forward to hearing from you, Alejo.
Hi, good morning, everybody from Buenos Aires. Hi, Carlos. Hi, Araceli. How are you? Just a couple of things. Here in Argentina, most of, not to say all companies are assisted financially by the government. They don't cover, with the rates, they don't usually cover their running cost. And CapEx is on charge of the state and some multilateral organizations, like IDB or World Bank or other multilateral banks.
Mm-hmm.
For the special case of this pandemic, we are quite worried about those who are outside the net, those who are not reached by the traditional water services. That's because of that was my previous question. Here in Buenos Aires, we have in the Buenos Aires surrounding area, in the Great Buenos Aires area, we have roughly 3.5 million people who are not served by the water company. They get water from the ground or from wherever they can get water. Of course, without water they don't live. So some kind of water they do have, or they manage to have. But in the precise case of the COVID-19, the problem is that they has to have potable water for washing hands, at least with soap, to facilitate them the possibility of washing their hands. So we are trying to manage with the company to put some reservoirs, tanks in let's say particular areas where the water access is really difficult, and trying to fill those tanks in let's say in a rounding way with trucks, so we can assure that everybody will have the possibility of washing their hands. This is, let's say, for the emergency. And we think that this can be the starting point of future arrangements for facilitating access to potable water for those people, because we, at the pace we are going with the extension of the systems, we see that we are not going to arrive to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal, we are not going to arrive at 2030 with a full service for the Buenos Aires, Gran Buenos Aires area. Both water and sewage. Sewage is worse, of course. We have 6 million people outside the sewage systems in the Great Buenos Aires area, surrounding area.
Wow.
So those are our main concerns now in the pandemic of COVID-19 case.
Thank you very much, Alejo, for sharing that with us. I'm sure that's giving everybody else some things to think about, for sure. Sam, I believe we have someone else. I believe Imran would like to share something with us too. A question, a comment?
Yes. So Imran will go ahead and follow up now, and I will unmute your audio. Can you hear us, Imran?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
Hi, Carlos.
Great,
Hi,
thank you.
Araceli. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Carlos, my question was that definitely while supplying the water, you charge the tariffs and the consumer has to pay that. So while people, those who are at homes, they are individual customers and the use of water is increased. The cost is also increased for them because of the pandemic. Their financial resources are very limited. So what is happening at your part?
Sorry, what is happening where?
What is happening on your part? What relief is being planned or not planned for the consumers, those who are already under financial stress right now, and the use of water, because everybody has to wash hands. The use of water in the consumers in the homes has increased a lot, and they have to pay individually. As far as you've explained that the water usage at airports has decreased, but then those airports or those institutions are paying the water tariffs from their pocket. But now I'm just talking about a domestic consumer, those who are confined at their homes, using more water, already financially under stress. So how is there any thought to give them a relief? To give, hello? Yeah.
I think Carlos, that your microphone was got unmuted just now. So I think Imran is asking us if you have any thoughts about how to help those customers, those domestic customers that because they are in confinement right now, the water consumption is actually increased, and they were already and maybe in a difficult financial situation. So what is being done in Brazil, if you're aware, in that regard, to help them with those higher bills in water consumption at homes?
Okay, so for those that are poor, I mean, we have the whole country policies direct to the poor. Okay, so on one hand, as the water sector dimension, I would say that they don't need to pay their bills for at least 2-3 months. I mean, that's a decision that is being made by many municipalities. On the other hand, the federal government is providing funds for poor in the whole country. I mean, they're gonna get some money from the government, some checks from the government, so they can survive and, as I said, pay the groceries and let the bills for the future. But as a federal government policy, they're trying to help the poor to get money, because many of them, they don't have a job, or maybe they don't have a formal job, so they work from home, or they work on the streets, or some of them lost their jobs too. So they're trying to help them getting the money to pass or to go and to survive this moment. And that's as the look at the country as a whole, not as the water sector itself. And the water sector, those that are poor are not, they don't need to pay. I mean, I make a general statement that I don't know if it's true everywhere in the country, but I can say, as I said, because it's a local decision, but I'm saying that's something that's is happening a lot in the country. You know, so on one hand, federal government giving checks to everybody. On the other hand, all the utilities, not only water, for example, energy, we have the same thing. So the poor, they don't need to pay their energy, their electricity bills for 3 months, something like this, you know. So on the other hand, we are relieving the poor from the utilities bills.
Very good. Thank you, Carlos. I'm not sure right now if we have any other questions that people may want to use the microphone for, but I do have another question on the chat that we have not answered yet, and it's from, I'm sorry if I mispronounced it, Alagi. Are you encouraging water utilities and consumers to implement supply and demand side water efficiency and conservation measures? So are you encouraging water utilities and consumers to implement supply and demand side water efficiency and conservation measures?
Well, at my agency, we have doing this for a while. We have campaigns, just not right now because of the crisis, but just for, especially because we had the severe drought a few years ago. And I believe that other agents at state level or municipality are doing the same. I don't have the total information here right now, but I have some few examples that I've heard so far, but I don't know if they're really representative of the whole country. But those measures are being discussed and trying to be implemented for a while because of the droughts that we had a few years ago.
Okay. It looks like we have a request, Sam, as well from Olabisi. Is that a question, I think, or a comment that he might want to make?
Not quite sure.
Is a request.
Olabisi, would you like to raise your hand?
Yes.
I think she's there. Yeah,
Okay,
please
sure,
go ahead. Let us
please.
know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good. Oh, I think her mic just got cut off.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. I want to plead with you that after the conference, maybe you can share with me the recordings so that we can use that to actually engage the regulatory head who has been struggling since morning to register for the conference but could not succeed because of the unstable connection he has from where he's staying. You know, we work from home, so the connection of where he stays is not good enough. So if I have this, we can share with him, and then from there, all our submissions to them, we have basis to request for support from the government to cushion the staying at home and extra work being done because of this pandemic. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, would you like to answer that question? We will definitely share the recordings, right?
Absolutely. So following our session, we'll send a follow-up message with the archive session details, and then you'll be able to access that there. And then, of course, please feel free to share that, with any of your colleagues, that, might also benefit from Next Practices Live. But yes, we will be sending a follow-up email with all of that information.
So Sam, do we have anybody else who may want to ask any live questions? Otherwise, I do have another question for Carlos.
As of right now, I don't see any hands raised, but if anyone has anything that they'd like to share or ask, please feel free to do so.
Okay. Well, Carlos, I do have another question for you. And again, looking kind of into the future. it's a question that Mark Jameson is asking on the chat to share, and what might be a next practice, not a best practice, but a next practice for Brazil to improve water during the pandemic? You know, what can we learn from this to improve water? And what are some lessons learned so far in Brazil, in your opinion?
Okay. Well, my first comment would be in line with what Alejo Molinari said a few minutes ago, that we don't have time to waste. You know, we cannot waste time. For example, we are discussing for a long time a new water act that is going to increase coverage in the country. So this time we are discussing, the investments are not being made. So we are lag behind the coverage. So we are, as I said, 50% of the population doesn't have access to sewage treatment and disposal. 15% of the Brazilian population doesn't have access to drinking water. So those are the people that are most at the risk right now. They cannot wash their hands, they cannot take showers, they have difficulties to even to cook. And during this pandemic, that's the first thing that they need. You know, so one lesson to learn is you cannot waste time with water and sanitation sector, because sometime in the future this will charge the price for that. You know, so that's my first point, thinking ahead. The second is when discussing who bear risks in water and sanitation contracts. So there's a risk that I don't know how it is addressed in every country, but the demand has reduced. You have the government risks, and next year we'll have a lot of discussion on what should be considered to renegotiate the contract. So to improve the risk divisions between government, utilities. So who is going to bear each risk? Because this risk, I think, wasn't mapped before, you know. So that's another thing that's going to improve. But my first point, I think, is the most important. We don't have time to lose, you know.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing all that with us, Carlos. It's really excellent to hear what is going on, because I think it gives us, in Brazil, of course, in the water sector, as well as in any other sector, of course, but it helps us all understand and gives us context and gives us some more things to think about and how we can do better, which is really, you know, one of the main outcomes that we hope that people get out of these webinars and sharing all that information and learning from one another. So thank you very, very much indeed. I'm not sure, Sam, if we have any additional questions, anybody that may want to ask live or through the chat. Is there anything that I might have missed? If we have a couple more minutes, or any additional thoughts that people may want to share.
Sure, so it looks like we do have a question from Ignatius, excuse me if I mispronounced that. The question is, what areas of improvement could be instituted to build resilience in the water sector post-COVID-19?
Can you repeat, please?
Yeah.
Sure, so the question says, what areas of improvement could be instituted to build resilience in the water sector post-COVID-19?
Well, as I said, I think coverage is the first thing that we have to improve. As I said before, we have, I mean, because the Brazilian figures are huge. Any percentage that you change in anything is huge. As I said, when you talk about 50% of people that don't have access to sewage, we're talking about 100 million people. When you say that 15% of our population doesn't have access to water, we're talking about 30 million people, you know. So it's to improve coverage. I think that's because any other pandemic, any other thing that's related to, or maybe we can have another disease in the future, water related. Today we're talking about COVID-19, but I don't know, imagine if in the future we are talking about cholera, for example. So if you don't have a good access, you don't have a reliable system, if you don't have water security, those things are going to affect us in the future. So I would say that's really go and look for improve water security in the country.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Of course, thank you so much, Carlos, for being with us today. I think this is probably the last of the questions. Is that correct, Sam, that we have for the time being?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Okay. So as usual, you are all welcome to stay a little longer and post any additional questions that you might have on the chat. And whether those are questions, thoughts, you know, comments, anything you want to let us know about, or even ideas for future webinars, topics that you'd like to see discussed about this this whole COVID-19 and pandemic and what to do, and so that we can all learn, please do let us know, because that's exactly what we want to do, help you out as much as we possibly can. And again, thank you so very much, Carlos, and everybody else for being here with us today. And best wishes to everybody, and good luck with everything. Thank you.
Thank you.